Uh, you'll let me know at about 10. Make it 10 minutes too. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. At before we start, I just want to mention that today is the yahrzeit of Josh Hoffman, Yoshua ben Yosef, and his mother name Yonina. We used to say Tehillim for him all the time. We would use the mother's name. And Josh was a special person. He had a lot of challenges in life, but as a person who had real avas of Torah, real love of Torah, not just of Torah, but of learning Torah. And he was like a walking library. But more than all of that was the way he treated everybody. And in a sense, when he was everybody's reference. Whenever somebody needed information, whether it was something that was mentioned in the Rishonim or in the Perushim on the Torah or whatever, they would always go to Josh, and Josh would always treat everybody with great respect, even those who knew much less than him. And when it's to his yahrzeit, the one thing he say, when people learn in yeshiva, so you know everybody that's there. But as time passes, many of the people are forgotten. Josh is one person who is not forgotten because of the way he treated everybody and the source of help he was for everybody. So he will always be remembered. And it wasn't just one generation of students. Josh, to a certain degree, was a Talmud in yeshivas all his life. And he constantly maintained contact. And it made no difference if somebody was involved in learning or one wasn't involved in learning. They all had great respect, regard, and almost love for Josh Hoffman. So on this yahrzeit, it's important to just remember who Josh really was. Now, I want to speak about Sefras Omer. And there is a halacha brought down. Interestingly, it's not brought down in the Gemara, even though they cite a pasuk, almost like a drasha for it. But that halacha the law is now, the mitzvah of counting the Omer starts with the second night of Pesach until Shavuos. The Torah says you have to count 7 weeks, 49 days, and on the 50th day, that's Shavuos. But the halacha is that when we count the Sefira every night, we say tonight, let's say the second night of Pesach, we say tonight is the first day in the count of the Omer, and the second night we say the third night of Pesach, we say tonight is the second night of the Omer, etc., until we get to Shavuos. So the halacha is that when we, of course, before we count Sefira, we make a bracha, just like any other mitzvah, perhaps a little different than every other mitzvah, and then we count the Sefira. And the law is that we have to stand when we count the Sefira. And they cite a pasuk because the Torah says, Shiva Shavuos Tispor Lach. You shall count 7 weeks for yourselves. Mehachel Chomish Bakama, from when the sickle is first put to the standing crop. That's when they would cut the wheat for the shtei halechem. They cut the barley for the Omer korban. Shall you begin counting 7 weeks? So bakama means standing crop, but there is a drasha. Our sages read the word bikuma. When you are standing, you shall begin counting the 7 weeks, and from there we derive And the interesting thing is, this is not a halacha that's mentioned in the Gemara, but all the Rishonim cited. Apparently, they had a medrash that we do not have, and that the Sefras Omer has to be by standing. Needless to mention, it's probably a Rabbanan. It's a rabbinical law. It's not a biblical law. Even though a pasuk, a verse in the Bible, in the Torah, is cited as the source for it, but we have a general rule: whenever the Chachamim, whenever the sages enacted a law, they identified it with a pasuk, with a verse in the Torah. Now, there is, and the question is, why is it that we have to stand for the Sefras Omer? Why did the Chachamim feel that it was important that we should stand for the Sefras Omer, for the counting of the Omer? And what's interesting is there is a whole dispute as to whether this law that you have to stand for the counting of the Omer applies to the bracha that is recited before you count the Omer. There are some opinions that from there we deduce to other mitzvos that when you recite a bracha, you also stand. But the source is the mitzvah of Sefras Omer. So from many Rishonim, many poskim, it follows that when you make the bracha before you count the Omer, you have to stand also. Even though bracha generally is a separate mitzvah, nevertheless, you have to stand. Whereas from the Rambam, it appears, no, this law is only talking about the sphere of the counting of the Omer itself. It's not talking about the bracha. Now, the question is, the pasuk certainly does not talk about the bracha, so why should it apply to the bracha? But there are two possible ways to understand it. One possible way to understand it is there is a machlokes between the Rambam and the Raavya. Now, the general rule is that if somebody has a doubt whether he fulfilled a biblical mitzvah, a mitzvah d'oraisa, let's say the mitzvah of matzah, safek d'oraisa l'chomer, so he has to eat the matzah. Again, it might not be again, but he has to eat the matzah to be assured that he fulfilled the mitzvah. And so there is a dispute, though. Let's say someone has a doubt whether he fulfilled the mitzvah of matzah or not. So he has to eat the matzah over again. So does he recite the bracha on the matzah again or not? Or he just eats the matzah? The Rambam's opinion is that he doesn't recite the bracha again because the bracha is rabbinic. It's a separate mitzvah. It's not part of the mitzvah of matzah. It's a mitzvah to do before you eat the matzah. Whereas the Raavya's opinion is no, that you have to recite the bracha. Why? After all, the bracha is only rabbinic. But the answer is the bracha is rabbinic, but rabbinically they made it as part of the mitzvah of matzah. And since the mitzvah of matzah in its essence is a biblical mitzvah, is a mitzvah d'oraisa, so we have to treat the bracha in the same manner. So this is the opinions that say that you have to stand for the bracha also, even though the pasuk is only talking about the mitzvah of counting, it doesn't talk about the mitzvah of bracha. They obviously hold, like the Raavya, that the bracha was enacted as part of the mitzvah of counting. So since in regard to the mitzvah of counting, you have to stand, so for the mitzvah of bracha, you also have to stand. Now, in addition, there is a Raavya, my uncle always would quote, you see in the notes of the Shiurim, my uncle would quote the Raavya. The Raavya's opinion is that the counting of the Sefira was enacted as part of a bracha. I'll give you an example. Example is let's say a mitzvah of Kiddush. On a biblical level, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, all you have to do is say some words about the night or the day being Shabbos. Matter of fact, when during World War II, when the many Jews escaped to China and Japan from the invading Nazi army, and there was a question as to where the halachic international date line is. And where they were, there was some question as to whether Shabbos should be observed on what was Saturday in that area, or what was halachically Sunday in that area. There's a question whether the halachic international date line is 90 degrees from Jerusalem or 180 degrees from Jerusalem. And there are other opinions also. So the question was asked of Reb Simcha Zelig Riga. Reb Simcha Zelig was the Dayan of Brisk. So he said that on one day, we don't want to go into the details, he should observe it as Shabbos, completely as Shabbos, with the biblical laws as well as the rabbinical laws. And the other day, he says you should observe just the biblical laws. And he gave an example. He said, Kiddush. What you should do is, he said, is when you see a person, just say Good Shabbos. When you say Good Shabbos, on a biblical sense, you fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. But the rabbis enacted that the mitzvah of Kiddush should be done through the recitation of a bracha. So the mitzvah, so the Raavya's opinion is that Sefras Omer should also be fulfilled as part of a bracha. Raavya says, we say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosa b'tzivanu al Sefras Omer, who sanctified us and commanded us regarding the mitzvah of counting the Omer. So the Raavya says that then you say Shehayom, that today is the first day in the count of the Omer. In other words, the recitation of the Sefira has to be part of the bracha. The question is, why should it be that way? Why should it be that by Sefras Omer, by the counting of the Omer, the bracha, the mitzvah has to be recited as part of the bracha? All other mitzvahs, the bracha is on the mitzvah. Here, the Sefira, according to the Raavya, is part of the bracha. But there are some Rishonim, the famous question everybody asks, Rashi, Tosfos. On one hand, the Torah tells us we have to count Sefira for 7 weeks. 7 times 7 is 49. On the other hand, the Torah says, Tisperu Chamishim Yom, you shall count it for 50 days. So all kinds of answers are given, Rashi and Tosfos. However, I once saw brought down, I think it was in the name of the Sefer Aguda, I'm not sure, that the counting of the Sefira is 49 days, but the 50th day, that's when we recite Yom Chag HaShavuos, says that. When we sanctify the Chag HaShavuos through the recitation of Kiddush. So since the mitzvah of Sefira is connected to the mitzvah of Kiddush, so just like Kiddush has to be fulfilled, even though biblically it could be recited without a bracha, just by saying Good Shabbos, or today is Shabbos. But since rabbinically it has to be recited through the recitation of a bracha, so too the Sefras Omer has to be recited through the recitation of a bracha. But on a hashkafa level, we have to understand the connection between the mitzvah of Kiddush, of Shavuos, and the halacha of Sefras Omer, of counting the Omer. Now, but according to the Rambam, we still have to understand why was Sefras Omer singled out that in performing that mitzvah you have to stand. Now, the Torah tells us that when the Jewish people came to Mount Sinai, by Yichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahor, the Jewish people encamped at Mount Sinai next to the mountain, or opposite the mountain. And the Medrash points out, Rashi brings part of the Medrash, not the whole Medrash, but the Medrash points out that when they came to Sinai, the Torah employs the expression by Yichan, they settled, but in the singular form, as if he settled, but referring to the whole Jewish people. Whereas everywhere else, it's Vayachanu. Wherever else where they set up camp, there was strife between them, there were arguments between them, but when they encamped around Mount Sinai, so there everything was ke'ish echad b'leiv echad. It was like one person with one heart. And the Medrash says, Rashi doesn't bring the whole Medrash, but the Medrash says that God said, let me use this opportunity to give them the Torah. And the question is, why is it that a prerequisite for the giving of the Torah, was to be like one, that the nation should be like one person with one heart? And the answer is very simple, because when the Jewish people accepted the Torah, they didn't accept the Torah for themselves. They accepted the Torah for all the Jewish people. It was, they accept Torah. Now, how can I accept the Torah for another person? I can accept it for myself. But if I come like ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, if I come like one person with one heart, so then the Torah, I can accept the Torah for all of the Jewish people, because me and them are one. And it's very interesting that by the Mishkan, by the tabernacle, and later on in the Beis HaMikdash, the Aron, the Ark, had two angelic figures on it or the side of it. And there seems to be a contradiction between two verses. One verse says about these angelic figures, Upneihem ishalochim, the face of one face the other. And the other says, Upneihem ishal habayis, the face of one did not face the other, but instead they turned and faced the walls of the tabernacle or of the Beis HaMikdash. They did not face each other. And the Medrash resolves, there are two ways to resolve the contradiction, but one was, kan osin ritzono shel makom, kan ein osin ritzono shel makom. When the Jewish people were doing the will of God and acting properly, so the two angelic figures faced each other. But when the two angelic figures did not face each other, they faced the wall of the Mishkan, they faced the wall of the Beis HaMikdash, of the temple, then it was a sign, miraculous sign, They enos in ritzonol shamakom. They were not doing the will of God. And the question arises, we can understand this idea in regard to mitzvos bein adam l'chaveiro. We have two types of mitzvos in the Torah. The Vilna Gaon says three types, but everybody else has two types of mitzvos. There's the mitzvahs between man and God, and the mitzvahs between man and man. So facing each other is a good symbol for osin mitzono shamakom, for doing the will of God in regard to the mitzvahs between one person and another, and not facing each other, showing your back to each other. That would be an appropriate symbol for not being committed to doing the mitzvahs between man and man. But we know a large part of the Torah is not just mitzvahs bein adam lechaveiro, between man and man, between man and God. Almost all the ritualistic mitzvahs are between man and God, have nothing to do with the relationship between man and man. So how could the angelic figures facing each other be the symbol of osin ritzonol shamakom, of doing the will of God in regard to the mitzvahs bein adam lamakom, between man and man, between man and God, between man and God. But I think, what was the Mishkan? I've mentioned before. What was the Beis HaMikdash? The Ramban points out the Beis HaMikdash was the perpetuation of Sinai. It was the perpetuation of Matan Torah. At Matan Torah, the Torah Shebachsav was given, the written Torah was given, the Luchos were given, the tablets with the 10 Commandments were given, and all of that was kept in the Aron, in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple. The Torah Shebaal Peh was given, the oral tradition was given, and the Bezin HaGadol would sit in the Lishkas HaGazis, and the Bezin HaGadol was considered the foundation, the Amud Torah Shebaal Peh, the foundation of the oral tradition. So the Beis HaMikdash was the perpetuation, not just of Sinai, not just the Dusha of Sinai, as the Ramban says, but because it was the perpetuation of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah. But at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people received the Torah. Why? Because they were ke'ish echad b'leiv echad. They were like one person with one heart. So because they were like one person with one heart, they were able to give the Torah. The angelic figures represent the fact that we are agents of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. An angel is an agent of God. We see that the Navi from time to time is called a Malach. So because the Navi is given a mission from God, he's an agent of God. But perhaps to a lesser degree, every Jew is given a mission from God. So when those who have the mission from God, when every Jew has the mission from God, it's Pnei Mishalachim. That's a sign that Matan Torah still continues. But if it's Pnei Mishal Abayis, but if they face the walls, then Matan Torah is not continuing. And our obligation accepting the Torah is not to accept the Torah for ourselves. It's to accept the Torah for all Jewish people. And just as a small note, I want to mention the one thing special about Josh. When Josh learned, he didn't just learn for himself. He was learning for everybody. People felt very comfortable coming over to him. and he would share his knowledge. He was a walking library. He would share his knowledge to them. When he learned not just for himself. He accepted Torah not just for himself, but for everybody that wanted to learn from him. And he did not act as a Rebbe, as a teacher. He did in the manner of acting as a chavrusa, even though in fact he was a teacher. But he acted as if he was a study partner, but in the process he was a teacher. Now, so the idea of Matan Torah was so this is why it was, but we have to ask the question, why is it that until they came to Sinai, until they came to Sinai, until they came to Sinai, whenever they camped, there was strife. But at Sinai, it was ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person with one heart. Now, there is a machlokus, a dispute. It's a famous machlokus between the Rashba and the Behag. There are different versions of what the Behag actually holds. I guess there were different textual readings in the Behag. But what the accepted version seems to be, now we count Sphira, we count from day 1 through day 49. The day before Shavuos is day 49. And when we count the Sphira, so we count the Sphira, but let's say somebody will miss one day. The question is, does he still count the other days? So the Behag seems to say that he doesn't count the other days. There are those that try to read the Behag differently. But the simple reading of the Rishonim regarding the Behag, there's a Tosas and Megillah that seems to imply something different. But the simple reading of the Behag is that if you miss one day, it's not a complete count. Since it's not a complete count, so there's no longer a mitzvah to count. Whereas the opinion of the Ri and the Rashba is that if you miss a day, you can still count. And the question is raised. My uncle wrote about it. The question is raised against the Rashba. I'm not going to go into the whole piece. The question is raised against the Rashba and the Ri. That how can you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a count, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 is not a count. If you skip 1, it ceases to be a count. It's certainly not a complete count. So how is it? How can you count the Sphira? It is the Mishnah Brura, a very strange Mishnah Brura. It's really the Magen Avram says it. He says that what is the argument? The argument is whether all the days of Sphira are one mitzvah or each day is a separate mitzvah. Okay, my father and my uncle said, no, each day is a separate mitzvah, but those who say you can't count anymore till the 6th day, or let's say you forget the 6th day, but the first 5 days you have the separate mitzvahs each day because it's still a count. Once it ceases to be a count, you can't count anymore. But in any case, but we have to understand the opinion that says that the mitzvah continues even if you didn't count. Now, but the answer, and my uncle gives this answer, years ago I had mentioned this answer, then when they started publishing the notes of my uncle's shiurim, so he gave the same answer, but he explains it somewhat differently. He explains it more a halachic perspective. I want to explain it on a hashkafa perspective. He said that The mitzvah of Sefras Omer is joining the community count. In other words, the Jewish people as such are required to keep account. But each individual has a requirement and a responsibility to partake in the count of the individual. In a sense, from a hashkafa perspective, when something is a mitzvah for the community, everybody says, let the other one do it. It'll be taken care of. It's not my personal obligation. The mitzvah of Sefira comes and tells me, you as an individual have a responsibility to be involved in the project of the community. And it's indicative of the fact that I am responsible for others. I am responsible for the community. So the mitzvah of Sefira, so that's the Rashba's opinion. The Rashba's opinion, and the Chinuch says that if a person forgot one day, the Rashba says he continues to count im Shor Yisrael with the other Jewish people. Why? In other words, I might have missed one day, but I am counting as part of the Jewish people. And the count of the Jewish people continued. Now, it's interesting, in regard to the Akedah, when Yitzchak was given Avram was given the command to take Yitzchak to Eretz HaMoriah, to the land of Moriah, to one of the mountains that God said he will tell him. So he took together with Yitzchak Shnei Aravito. He took his two servants with him. And who were the two servants? The Medrash says one was Yishmael, and the other one was Eliezer. Eliezer was the main servant, the foreman of Abraham's house. He was in charge of all the other servants. And Eliezer was known to be extremely God-fearing. Great miracles happened when Abraham entrusted him with all kinds of missions. But Vayhi Bayom Shlishi, it was on the third day. Vayar Samakom Erachok. Abraham saw the place, the mountain, that he was supposed to sacrifice Yitzchak from afar. God didn't tell him yet which mountain it was. And God said to Abraham, so Abraham said to his servants, no, he said to Isaac, so what the Medrash says, what did Abraham see? He said, he saw Har Noah, he saw a beautiful mountain, for Anon Kosher Aleha, and a heavenly cloud tied to it. Then he turned to Yitzchak, Isaac, and he said to Yitzchak, what do you see? And Yitzchak said, I see a beautiful mountain, Ba'anan kosher aleha, and a heavenly cloud is attached to it. And then he turned to his servants, Yishmael and Eliezer, and he said, Yishmael was the son through Hagar, but he was a son of the Hagar was a maidservant. So he's identified in the Medrash also as a servant. In the Torah, Shnei Narav. So he said to them, what do you see? And they said, we don't see anything. So he said to them, Shvu lechem poem achamor. You stand here, stay here with the donkey. V'ani v'hanar nelcha ko. And me and the lad, meaning Isaac, we'll go there, and we will bow down to God, and we return to you. So, and then he said, stay here with the donkey. And the question arises, why did he say, stay here with the donkey? So the Medrash says, he said, you don't see anything. The donkey doesn't see anything. Stay here with the donkey. What's the idea? But in ancient times, it's not that it necessarily should have been that way, but those were the facts of life. The facts of life was, to a certain degree, certainly Avram treated his servants much better. But the facts of life was those who had a servile perspective. In a sense, they were property, just like the donkey was property. The donkey was living, but it was property. So the servants were property also. It's very interesting. By Sefras Omer, the Omer sacrifice was barley. Barley in biblical times was food that was given to animals. But Shavuos, we gave the Shtei Halechem. That was made from wheat. That is the wheat, is the foundation of the diet of mankind. In a sense, Sefras Omer represents the idea of going from, in a sense, the state of those identified with animals. What do you think the position of the Jews was in Egypt? They were treated at best like animals. And to a certain degree, that servile perspective was still there when they left Egypt. And the idea of the 49 days, was to rid themselves of that perspective. So on the first of the 49 days, they gave the korban, the sacrifice was a barley sacrifice. But on Shavuos, the sacrifice was made from wheat. It represents the transference from a servile perspective to a human perspective. And it's interesting, the halach is mitzvah lemimnei yoma or mitzvah lemimnei shavuah. The mitzvah of Sefras Omer is a mitzvah of counting days and a mitzvah of counting weeks. Abaye said that. So the question is, what's the significance of counting both days and weeks? And Shavuos is we refer to it as not as the holiday of the 50th. The Christians refer to it as the holiday of the 50th. In Jewish tradition, it's referred to the holiday of the weeks. Shavuos is the holiday of the weeks. What's the significance? But I think an animal understands to a certain degree the concept of a day. He wakes up, there's light, he works, he's fed, he sleeps. But the concept of a week, an animal doesn't understand. And to a certain degree, and it's in the Medrash tells us that Eliezer and Yishmael, Eliezer's daughter, could not marry Yitzchak. Why couldn't he marry Yitzchak? But the answer is, to be the mother of the Jewish people, you have to have a sense for the future. A slave only knows today. A slave has no sense of the future. The children of a slave are sold away from the slave. His parents are sold away from him. They have no perspective of the future. They only have a perspective of now. Eliezer was a great man, and to be a parent of the Jewish people, you have to have a sense for the future. Eliezer was a great person, and he recognized the Shekhinah, but only when the Shekhinah, when the divine glory was right in front of him. But from afar, he could not recognize the Shekhinah. What was special about Avram and Yitzchak as opposed to Eliezer and Yishmael? Avram and Yitzchak could see the heavenly cloud from afar. They can draw inspiration from the future. There was a connection between past, present, and future. However, Yishmael and Eliezer, as great as Eliezer was, Kafzalo Haderech, as great as he was, he only had a sense for the present. Where are all the descendants of the servants of Avraham? Bas hanefesh asher asu b'charan. The Medrash says that Avraham had an impact. He had a whole community. Where are they? The answer is, for the most part, they were servants of Avraham. They had no concept of a future. Yes, they recognized the Shekhinah. They lived in the house of Avraham. But they didn't have that connection with the future. And because of that, we do not know where they are today and where the descendants are. And in a sense, even the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, and even by Kriyas Yamsuf, and the Jewish people were on a very high level after Kriyas Yamsuf, they sang the Shira. But the Medrash tells us, Rasa Shivcha Yam, the maidservant at the sea, saw the more divine revelation than Yecheskel ben Buzi, than the prophet Yecheskel. Now the question is, we know what happened to the prophet Yecheskel, but what happened to the maidservant at the sea? She saw more divine revelation. The answer was Al Hayam. By the sea, she saw it. She wasn't able to take it with her into the future. Why is it? What united the Jews at Sinai? What united the Jews at Sinai was the impact of the fact that this is where God, they finally reached a place where God was going to reveal himself to them and where they were going to accept the Torah. But, so, in a sense, recognize identification with the presence of God, figuratively seeing the Shekhinah, the divine glory. That's what unites the Jewish people, the knowledge of seeing the divine glory unites the Jewish people. But unfortunately, the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, they had a circle perspective. And they were not able to be inspired yet. They might have counted the Sefira, but they didn't see themselves yet in the presence of God. They couldn't see Vayaris HaMakom Eirachok. Makom is also the name of God. They couldn't see the presence of God from afar. They could only see it when it was close up to them. So in a sense, this was what Sefras Omer is. Sefras Omer is the idea, in other words, we have to make a tikkun. Sometimes when things are done improperly, the Torah requires from us, this is more of a mystical concept, it's a concept in Kabbalah, that we do not act appropriately, we do some kind of spiritual damage in heaven. And when the Jewish people went through the Midbar, went through the desert, and they did not yet, they were not yet inspired by the divine presence. They did not have that idea of Vayaris HaMakom Eirachok. They couldn't see the Shekhinah from afar. Only once they came to Sinai. Because they couldn't see the Shekhinah from afar. So every time they settled, it was in conflict. They weren't Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. Only once they knew they finally reached that place. So it was Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. They were like one person with one heart. And in a sense, the Sefras Omer, that the Sefras Omer is a tikkun for this mistake that the Jewish people made when they went through the desert and their trip to Mount Sinai, because ideally they should not have had the serval perspective. Ideally, they should have seen the Shekhinah of Mount Sinai from afar. And had they seen the Shekhinah from afar, if they had seen the glory of Sinai from afar, they would have been Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, like one person with one heart, long before they came to Sinai. And in a sense, this is what when we count Sefira, we have to come like one nation, but we have an obligation. When we understand the idea that we're part of a group, we're part of a nation, we have to realize that we have an individual responsibility for the nation. We cannot just leave it up to the other person. We have to be sensitive to the needs of the other people. You can't be, that's what it means, Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, with one heart. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is you feel bad for the person. Empathy is that you feel his pain. And sometimes even more difficult than that is feeling his joy. And so Sefras Omer is a tikkun. We're trying to correct the mistake that we made. And as we figuratively march to Matan Torah and we count the Sefira, we stand up indicative of the fact that we see the Shekhinah in front of us. We see the divine glory in front of us. And that's why there is a special mitzvah, a special din, a special law, that we count Sefira, we have to stand up, because we have to see ourselves as if that we see the divine glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the idea of bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem. When you couple the bracha, which talks about blessed is you, God, we're talking to God. And the mitzvah of Sefira, we do it in a manner, we're trying to correct the way that we did it wrong. We want to do it in a sense of sensing the presence of God. So therefore, by the mitzvah of Sefira, the Chachamim instituted, according to the Raavya, that the bracha, we could suggest that the bracha of Sefira should be part of the mitzvah of Sefira. And I want to conclude with a few words about Josh. As I mentioned before, when Josh accepted the Torah, when he learned the Torah, was a Torah's chesed, he learned not only for himself, he learned for others. And he didn't put himself above anybody else. He was everybody's friend, even though in truth, he was everybody's Rabbi, everybody's teacher. He was able, in him, to a certain degree, it was like all Klal Yisrael was learning, because he wasn't learning for himself. He was concerned about the needs of everybody. I was told over a story today, I was reminded of it. It's very interesting. You know, Josh had so much knowledge in everything. I think in the 80s and 90s, they would put him on the phone to answer questions. People would call in because Josh could answer. give information, answering any question. And someone called in a certain lady. She's not observant at all. Believe me, that's the minimum. She was at that time anyway. She wasn't observant at all. And the lady became pregnant, and she was contemplating about having an abortion. And Josh on the phone convinced her not to have an abortion. And when the boy became bar mitzvah, of course, the mother invited Josh to the bar mitzvah. I mean, she never met Josh before. But on the phone, he had this impact on her. As a matter of fact, when the boy was born, he was named after Josh, Yehoshua. And Josh, even though he had a lot of challenges in life, sickness and everything, and he really was never able to start his own family. But he has connections with both the past and the future, because the impact that he had will be given over from generation to generation to all those who had contact with him. And today it's his yahrzeit. Josh was Pneihem Ish Halachiv, who was always facing the other one, trying to help the other one. He's the symbol of Matan Torah. And may his memory inspire us that we should follow in his footsteps. Okay.
Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, please put it in the chat right now. The first question, Rabbi, we had was, since outside of Israel we have Sfeika Diyoma, and we don't know the correct day to start counting, why do we make a bracha when we count Sfira? Why isn't it considered a suffix?
Well, clearly the first day is the main day, and they did not apply Sfeika Diyoma. There are many reasons given, but I think the easiest one to understand is the Dvar Avram's answer. And the Dvar Avram's answer is that if we would employ Sfeika Diyoma, we would have to count 2 days. And he says if you count today is the first day, today is the second day, that's no count at all. So actually, it's in the Dvar Avram Sefer, but the Dvar Avram said that teretz over to my uncle. So, in other words, so Sfeika Diyoma could not be employed in regard to Sfiras Omer. The Balamor and the Raavya, they give all kinds of other answers to that question. If you want another answer, we could say, because since the mitzvah, just on the basis of what I said, since the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is joining Klal Yisrael in their count, so we don't want to have a count separate from the Jewish people. And since the Jews in Eretz Yisrael know which day it is, and we today know which day it is, so we join the Jewish people the Jewish people everywhere in their accounts, especially the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. So they felt that it was better not to make Sfeika Diyoma in regard to Sfiras Omer. Also, Sfiras Omer was enacted in regard to Yom Tov, but the Sfiras Omer itself continues between Pesach and Shavuos. And by the time Shavuos came, they knew what was the right day. Matter of fact, the Rambam asked the question, why do we observe 2 days? She says, Shalolachlok b'moados. We don't want to make a difference between one holiday and the other. But Sfiras Omer is not a holiday. And by the time Shavuos came, the end of Sfiras Omer, they certainly knew which day it was. Okay.
If anyone else has a question, please type it into the chat. Right now, there are no other questions. I just want to mention I put the link to Josh's the archives of Josh's Netvort on the Parsha. It's in the chat. It's yeshivasbrisk.freeservers.com/netvort.html. So anyone who wants to check out Josh's Netvorts can go there.
My guess is that there were other times, because you see from the Medrash that there were times when it was Pneihem Mishal Achiv, and there were times when it was Pneihem Mishal Abayis. So there were other times. Unfortunately, these other times usually come when we face an enemy, we face a threat. But we look forward to the day. When, and that's the future, when it'll be Pneihem, it'll be constantly Pneihem Ishal Achiv, and all Klal Yisrael will be united.
Thank you. Rabbi mentioned earlier that according to everyone, there's two categories of mitzvos, between man and between man and God. But according to the Vilna Gaon, there's a third category. What is the third category?
Between man and himself. Between man and himself. Ben Ish La'atzmo.
So I think the Vilna Gaon says that arayos are part of that category.
Arayos is the main one, but I heard from my father, of course that would depend, but it's only going to Vilna Gaon, that let's say Mahu Racham Apati He Racham Midos. Many of the Midos are Ben Adam La'atzmo. So but that requires a whole share in itself to explain. But many of the mitzvahs of Midos is Ben Adam La'atzmo, between man and himself.